Listen, that silence you're hearing right now, most people are terrified of it. They spend their entire lives running from it, drowning it out with cheap music, meaningless small talk, and the constant hum of a screen. They think silence is an empty room. They are dead wrong. Silence is a vacuum. And in nature, a vacuum must be filled. Most of you are losing battles before you even step onto the field because you leak your power through your mouth. You over-explain your mistakes. You brag about your plans. You defend your honor against people who don't even matter. Every time you speak out of insecurity, you aren't communicating, you're bleeding. You are handing your enemies the map to your soul and wondering why they keep finding your triggers. Today that ends. We are going to study a man we will call the Ghost. He was just like you. He had a brilliant mind and a desperate need to be heard. He thought his words were his weapon, until the day they became his noose. He lost a fortune, a reputation, and the only person who ever truly saw him. All because he couldn't master the 3 seconds of restraint required to stay quiet. But in the wreckage of his old life, he discovered the most dangerous weapon in the human arsenal. It's not a loud shout or a clever insult. It is the heavy, suffocating weight of a man who looks you in the eye and says, absolutely nothing. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to deconstruct the dark psychology of silence. I'm going to show you how to use the vacuum effect to make people confess their secrets to you without asking a single question. I'm going to teach you the observer's edge and how to turn your presence into a psychological fortress that no one can breach. If you're looking for a quick tip or a motivational quote to post on your story, leave now. This is a journey into the shadow. This is for the 1% who are ready to stop being the noise and start becoming the signal. Welcome to your winter arc. The sage is speaking. It's time for you to listen. To understand the power of the void, you first have to look at the mess you've been calling a life. We live in a culture that treats silence like a technical glitch. If there's a gap in the conversation, you feel a physical itch to scratch it. If someone insults you, your blood boils until you've defended your pride. If you have a big plan, you can't wait to post it, tweet it, or tell your friends over drinks. You've been trained to believe that being heard is the same thing as being powerful. It's a lie, and it was the lie that destroyed the Ghost. Before he was a shadow, he was a man who lived out loud. He was talented, yes. He was ambitious. But he had a fatal flaw. He was an open book in a world full of predators who know exactly how to read between the lines. He didn't realize that every time he spoke to seek approval, he was actually performing a power leak. Think about the last time you felt overlooked in a meeting or a social circle. What did you do? You probably started talking more. You tried to be funny. You tried to prove how much you knew. You occupied space with sound because you were terrified that if you stopped making noise, you would disappear. The Ghost did this every day. At work, he would lay out his entire strategy to colleagues, thinking he was collaborating. He didn't see them taking notes on his weaknesses. In his relationships, he would over-explain his insecurities, thinking he was being vulnerable. He didn't realize he was just providing a manual on how to hurt him later. This is the cost of noise. When you speak too much, 2 things happen simultaneously, and both are catastrophic. First, you become predictable. And in any hierarchy, whether it's the corporate ladder or the social jungle, predictability is a death sentence. If I know exactly how you'll react when I push your buttons, I own you. If I know your goals because you bragged about them at dinner, I can move to intercept them before you even start. Second, your words lose their value. It's basic economics, inflation. When the market is flooded with a currency, that currency becomes worthless. If you have an opinion on everything, your opinion on anything carries no weight. The Ghost was the man whose voice was always the loudest in the room, which meant he was the one person no one actually bothered to listen to. He was a king who gave away his crown 1 sentence at a time. He thought he was building a reputation. In reality, he was just painting a target on his back. He was handing out keys to his kingdom to anyone who would listen, never stopping to ask why they were so interested in the locks. You see, the world doesn't just listen to your words, it uses them to build a cage around you. They categorize you. They label you. They decide who you are before you've even finished your sentence. And the Ghost? He built his own cage out of thousands of meaningless conversations, justified arguments, and harmless boasts. He was drowning in his own static. And the worst part? He was the one holding the megaphone. But the universe has a way of silencing those who won't silence themselves. For the Ghost, that moment was coming, not as a whisper but as a total, devastating collapse. Because when you leak enough power, eventually there's nothing left to hold the walls up. There is a specific kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. Feels like a funeral. For the ghost, the collapse didn't happen with a bang. It happened because he finally ran out of things to say to save himself. He had spent years building a house of cards out of his own words, and all it took was one person, one predator who had been quietly taking notes, to pull the bottom card. It was a betrayal he never saw coming, orchestrated by the very people he thought were his inner circle. Why? Because he had told them everything. He had told them his prices, his pivots, and his private fears. He had handed them the blueprint to his own destruction while he was busy trying to be the most likable person in the room. And one afternoon, the cage he built out of his own noise finally snapped shut. His reputation was dismantled using his own quotes. His projects were seized. The people who used to laugh at his jokes now looked through him as if he were made of glass. He tried to fight back. He did what he always did, he talked. He sent the long, defensive emails. He made the desperate phone calls. He tried to explain the context. But for the first time in his life, the more he spoke, the faster he disappeared. He realized with a sickening clarity that his words had no more value. He was screaming into a hurricane, and the wind was just throwing his own voice back in his face. This is the silence of the grave. It's that rock-bottom moment where you realize that your personality was just a series of loud habits, and none of them can protect you now. He retreated. He fled the city, the noise, and the people. He found himself in a place where no one knew his name and no one cared about his story. For the first 3 days, the silence in his new life was physical pain. His brain was addicted to the feedback loop of social validation. Without someone to listen to him, he felt like he was literally ceasing to exist. He would catch himself starting to speak to an empty room, trying to justify his failures to an invisible audience. He was haunted by the ghosts of the conversations he should have had, and the ones he should have stayed quiet for. But then something shifted. On the 4th night, sitting in the absolute dark of a mountain cabin, he stopped fighting the quiet. He stopped rehearsing his defense. He realized that as long as he was talking, he was a victim. But if he became silent, he became a mystery. He looked at his reflection in a cracked mirror and made a vow that would change the trajectory of his life. He decided that from that moment on, his words would no longer be free. If you wanted to know what he was thinking, you would have to earn it. If you wanted to see his heart, you would have to survive his silence first. He wasn't just not talking. He was entering a state of active observation. He began to see the world not as a stage for his performance, but as a laboratory. He watched how birds moved. He watched how the wind shaped the trees. He realized that the most powerful forces in nature are the ones that never make a sound until it's too late to stop them. The ghost was dead. And in that grave of silence, something else was starting to stir. Something colder. Something sharper. The sage was being born in the void. The ghost didn't return to his old life to reclaim his place. He returned to test his new skin. He walked into the same rooms where he once begged for attention, but this time he carried a vacuum with him. See, most people think silence is a lack of something. They think it's a hole. But in physics, a vacuum is a force of nature. It pulls. It demands to be filled. He sat across from a man who used to be his superior, a loud, arrogant talker who lived for the sound of his own praise. In the past, the ghost would have laughed at his jokes, agreed with his points, and tried to prove he was still in the game. This time the ghost said nothing. He sat with perfect posture, hands still, and looked the man directly in the eye. When the man finished his first sentence, the ghost didn't nod. He didn't say right or I agree. He just waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. The loud man started to fidget. His smile faltered. He looked down at his drink. He felt the vacuum of the ghost's silence pulling at his insecurities. To stop the crushing weight of that quiet, the man started talking again. He started explaining things he didn't need to explain. He started bragging about a project that wasn't even finished yet. He started leaking secrets about the company just to keep the conversation alive. The ghost realized the ultimate secret of the social predator. People will destroy themselves just to make a silent man feel comfortable. They think if they talk enough, they will eventually find the thing that makes you blink. They think they can buy your approval with information. But the more they talk, the more they hand you the keys to their own kingdom. He watched as the man across from him slowly unraveled. By the end of the 10-minute meeting, the ghost had said exactly 4 words: "Tell me more, and I see." Yet, as he walked away, the loud man was the one who felt exhausted. He felt like he had been interrogated, even though the ghost hadn't asked a single hard question. He had simply held up a mirror of silence, and the man couldn't stand the reflection. This is the first threshold. It's the moment you realize that your silence isn't a weakness, it's a filter. It filters out the people who are terrified of their own thoughts. It filters out the people who can't control their own impulses. The ghost was no longer the ghost. He was becoming the architect of the void. He realized that the world is a giant, noisy machine, and the only way to break the machine is to refuse to provide the fuel. He didn't need to be the smartest person in the room anymore. He just needed to be the one who wasn't afraid of the quiet. Because in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. But in the kingdom of the loud, the silent man is God. Most people think that becoming silent is about becoming peaceful. They think it's about finding Zen, lighting incense, and letting the world wash over them. They couldn't be more wrong. For the ghost, silence wasn't a white flag. It was a sharpening stone. He had entered the descent. This is the phase of the journey where you stop being afraid of your own darkness and start putting it to work. In psychology, we call this integrating the shadow. It's the moment you realize that the parts of you the world told you to hide, your coldness, your calculation, your capacity for detachment, are actually your greatest assets. You see, once you stop talking, you stop projecting a nice image. And when you stop trying to look nice, people stop knowing how to handle you. The ghost went back to the lion's den. He sat in a room with the man who had betrayed him, the one who had pulled the bottom card and watched his life collapse. In the old world, the ghost would have walked in with an angry speech. He would have shouted about fairness and loyalty. He would have tried to wound the man with insults. Instead, he walked in and sat down. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't offer a greeting. He just looked at the man with the heavy, unblinking gaze of a predator who has already won the hunt. The betrayer tried to laugh it off. "Good to see you, ghost. I heard you went away for a while. You look different." The man's smile twitched. He started to explain why he did what he did. He started making excuses about business and the market. He was waiting for the ghost to argue, to fight back, to give him a reason to feel like he was the rational one. But the ghost didn't give him that gift. He didn't even give him a frown. He just leaned back, eyes locked on the man's throat, and let the silence grow until it felt like it was physically squeezing the oxygen out of the room. This is weaponized silence. It is the ultimate form of emotional non-reaction. When someone attacks you, they are looking for a hook. They want to catch your anger, your fear, or your desperation. They want to lead you into a dance where they are the lead. But when you refuse to react, the hook has nothing to grab onto. You become a ghost in the literal sense. You are there, but you are untouchable. The ghost watched as the man's confidence turned into irritation, then into anxiety, and finally into a pure, primal fear. The man started sweating. He started stuttering. He realized that he was being judged by a standard he couldn't see. He felt like he was standing in front of a mirror that showed him every lie he'd ever told. The shadow isn't something you fight. It's something you wear like armor. By staying silent, the ghost was forcing the other man to fight himself. He was weaponizing the man's own conscience and his own paranoia. He realized that the loudest person in the room is always the one with the most to hide, and the quietest person is the one with the most to see. He didn't just survive the attack. He dismantled the attacker without moving a finger. He learned that the shadow isn't about being evil. It's about being impenetrable. It's about having a part of your soul that the world doesn't get to touch, talk to, or understand. He was no longer a victim of his past. He was the master of his presence. And as he walked out of that room, leaving the man shivering in a vacuum of his own making, the ghost realized that the descent was over. He had found the bottom of the dark, and he had found that it was solid ground. He was ready for the lesson of the oracle. When you reach the center of the storm, the wind stops. You finally stop fighting for your life and start understanding the mechanics of power. This is the midpoint. This is where the ghost becomes the sage. Up until now, you've used silence as a shield. You've used it to survive. But the oracle's lesson isn't about survival. It's about architectural dominance. It's about understanding that the world is built on 3 pillars, and if you master them, you don't just win the game, you own the board. The sage looked at the ghost and spoke three truths that cut through the remaining noise of his soul. The first pillar, predictability, is the grave of influence. The world is addicted to patterns. People spend their whole lives trying to figure you out so they can put you in a box and file you away. When you are loud, when you complain, when you brag, you are handing them the index to your mind. But when you are silent, you are a black box. You are a variable they cannot calculate. If they cannot predict your reaction, they cannot control your future. They will spend their energy guessing, theorizing, and worrying about what you might do. In that state of uncertainty, they are weak. In your state of stillness, you are absolute. The second pillar, scarcity, is the origin of value. Why is gold more valuable than iron? Not because it's stronger, but because it's rarer. Words are the same. If you speak 1,000 words a day, each one is worth a fraction of a cent. If you speak 10 words a week, each one is worth a kingdom. The oracle's lesson is simple. Every time you open your mouth to say something that doesn't need to be said, you are devaluing yourself. You are printing more currency and causing your own inflation. The sage knows that a single well-timed sentence in a room full of noise carries more weight than 100 shouting voices. When you speak less, people listen more. They lean in. They crave the sound of your voice because it's a rare event. The third pillar, the observer's edge, the map of the weak. While everyone else is busy performing, the silent man is mapping. Every leak they perform, every boast they make, every nervous laugh, it's data. People are desperate to tell you who they are, how they feel, and what they fear. All you have to do is let them. By staying quiet, you are allowing them to hang themselves with their own thread. You are seeing the cracks in their armor that they are too loud to notice. You aren't just listening to their words, you are listening to their subtext. You are seeing the sweat on their brow, the twitch in their eye, the desperation in their tone. The sage doesn't need to attack. He just needs to wait for the other person to reveal where the knife fits. The ghost realized that power isn't something you take. It's something you allow others to give you because they are too loud to hold on to it themselves. The lesson was over. The sage dissolved back into the stars, leaving the ghost with a clarity that felt like ice in his veins. He wasn't just a man who didn't talk anymore. He was a man who understood that silence is the highest form of intelligence. It is the ability to hold the world in your hand and not feel the need to squeeze it. The transition was complete. The ghost stood up, but he didn't feel like a ghost anymore. He felt like a monument. Knowledge is a gift, but wisdom is a burden. And for the ghost, the hardest part wasn't learning the silence. It was keeping it when the world started screaming for his soul. He was back in the arena. The same table. The same faces. But the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about a job or a reputation anymore. This was about the final piece of his identity. They were cornering him. They had found a flaw, or at least they thought they had. They were hurling accusations, spinning a narrative that made him look like the villain, the failure, the quiet freak who had nothing left to say. This is the all is lost moment. It's that split second where the old version of you, the one who needs to be right, the one who needs to defend his pride, starts clawing at the back of your throat. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct he'd spent a lifetime building was shouting at him, "Speak up. Defend yourself. If you don't say something now, they'll win. They'll tell the story and you'll be the monster." He felt the words bubbling up. He had the perfect comeback. He had the facts to bury them. He could have ended the meeting in 10 seconds with a loud, brilliant explosion of truth. But then he remembered the oracle. Predictability is the grave of influence. If he spoke now, he would be exactly who they expected him to be. He would be just another loud man fighting for his life. He would be back in the cage, feeding the very machine that had chewed him up and spat him out. The temptation was physical. It felt like a fever. He looked at the main antagonist, the man who was leading the charge, and saw the hunger in his eyes. The man wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for a reaction. He was fishing for a hook to drag the ghost back into the mud. For a long, agonizing minute, the room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. You could hear the tapping of a pen. Everyone was leaning in, waiting for the outburst. They were all addicted to the drama, waiting for the loud man to return so they could feel safe again. The ghost closed his eyes for a heartbeat. He let the anger rise, felt the heat of it, and then he simply let it pass through him. He didn't suppress it. He didn't fight it. He just observed it like a storm passing over a mountain. He opened his eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't even move a muscle in his face. The silence wasn't a void anymore. It was a solid, vibrating wall of pressure. In that moment, the ghost realized something profound. The only way to lose this fight was to show up for it. By refusing to defend himself, he was making their accusations irrelevant. He was showing them that their opinions of him didn't even register on his radar. He was at his lowest point, facing the total destruction of his old name, and he chose to let it burn. He realized that you can't be tempted by a ghost if you've already died to your ego. The loud man was finally truly dead. And in the wreckage of that temptation, the final battle was about to begin. This is the moment of the kinetic silence. It's the difference between a man who has nothing to say and a man who is choosing to say nothing. One is a void, the other is a weapon. The lead antagonist, a man whose entire identity was built on being the loudest fixer in the room, finally cracked. He couldn't handle the lack of feedback. He had thrown his best insults, his sharpest accusations, and his most desperate lies at the ghost, and they had all vanished into the black hole of the ghost's composure. The antagonist leaned over the table, his face turning a sickly, mottled red. "Say something," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of his own insecurity. "Defend yourself. Tell us why we shouldn't destroy you right now." The ghost didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He did something much more dangerous. He slowly leaned forward, placing his elbows on the cold mahogany table. He didn't look at the man's eyes, he looked at the man's forehead, a psychological trick that makes the other person feel exposed, as if you're looking through their skull at the gears turning inside. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 20. In a normal world, 20 seconds of silence in a high-stakes meeting feels like an eternity. It creates a physical pressure in the chest. It makes the ears ring. The other board members started to shift. They started to look at the antagonist, not the ghost. They saw the antagonist sweat. They saw his trembling hands. They saw a man who was losing a fight against a statue. Then the ghost performed the kinetic move. He didn't speak. He simply picked up a single pen from the table, held it up for a heartbeat, and then laid it down with a soft, deliberate click. That tiny sound was louder than any shout. It was the sound of a period at the end of a sentence. It was the sound of a man who was completely, utterly in control of the room. The antagonist broke. He started babbling. I mean the data was, we had a plan, it wasn't just me. He began to implicate himself. He began to name names, trying to fill the terrifying vacuum the ghost had created. He was confessing to crimes no one had even accused him of yet, just to stop the ringing in his ears. The ghost watched him drown. He realized that silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of truth. When you stop talking, the truth has nowhere to hide. It crawls out of the other person's mouth because they are too weak to carry it alone. By the time the antagonist stopped talking, he had dismantled his own career. He had revealed the betrayal, the fraud, and the fear. He had done more damage to himself in 3 minutes of panicked speech than the ghost could have done in 3 hours of arguing. The ghost stood up. He didn't look at the wreckage. He didn't savor the victory. He simply adjusted his coat and walked toward the door. He had won the war without firing a single shot. He had proven that the most powerful thing you can do when someone is trying to pull you into the mud is to stay on the mountain and let them climb until they run out of air. He wasn't a victim anymore. He wasn't even a survivor. He was the master of the kinetic silence. And as the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, the room remained silent, not because he was gone, but because he had finally taught them how much a single silence is worth. The doors are closed. The noise has stopped. The war is over. But for you, sitting there behind your screen, this is where the real work begins. You've watched the ghost die as a victim of his own noise and be reborn as a master of his own silence. You've seen the vacuum effect and the kinetic strike. But these aren't just scenes in a story, they are the blueprints for your own transformation. We call this the winter arc. It is the season where you go dark. It is the period of time where you stop announcing your moves and start making them in the shadows. The world tells you to stay connected. It tells you that if you aren't posting, you aren't growing. If you aren't talking, you aren't relevant. I am telling you that your relevance is a cage and your silence is your key. Starting today, I want you to adopt the 3-tier silence protocol. Tier 1, the 3-second rule. Before you answer any question, before you react to any insult, and before you agree to any deal, wait 3 seconds. Watch the other person's eyes. Feel the urge to speak and then let it starve. You will be amazed at how much people reveal when you simply refuse to fill the gap. Tier 2, the vault. For the next 30 days, you do not talk about your goals. Not to your friends, not to your family, and especially not to the internet. When you speak about a goal, your brain releases the dopamine of the achievement without doing the work. You are stealing your own fuel. Keep your fire in the vault. Let the world see the results, never the process. Tier 3, selective absence. Stop being so available. Stop answering every text in 10 seconds. Stop attending every event just because you're afraid of being forgotten. When you are always there, you are a commodity. When you disappear into your work, you become a legend. The ghost didn't become powerful because he found a secret scroll. He became powerful because he realized that his energy was finite, and he was wasting it on people who didn't deserve his sound. Look at your life. Look at the people who drain you, the arguments that don't matter, and the noise that keeps you from hearing your own intuition. It's time to cut the wire. This winter arc isn't about being lonely, it's about being singular. It's about realizing that the version of you that talks too much is a version that is trying to survive. The version of you that stays silent is the version that has already won. The sage is no longer speaking to you. The sage is in you. Type, "I am the signal," in the comments to commit to your silence. Let this be the last thing you say before you go dark. The world is loud. Be the silence that breaks it,